Sometimes the people society forgets are exactly who we need most. When a homeless veteran found a lost child wandering the streets at midnight, he made a choice that would change everything. What happened next will restore your faith in humanity. This homeless veteran, living in a makeshift tent behind an abandoned warehouse, became a hero when 50 police cars surrounded his shelter the very next day. But why were they there? Was he in trouble? Or was something extraordinary about to unfold? The answer will leave you speechless and remind you that true character isn't measured by what you own, but by what you're willing to sacrifice for others. Hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible true stories, and tell us in the comments what you would have done in this situation. This is a story about courage, compassion, and the unexpected heroes walking among us. Mine story. Let me tell you about Marcus Thompson, a 62-year-old Marine veteran whose story will forever change how you see the homeless individuals you pass on the street every single day. Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, earned a Purple Heart, and came home with invisible wounds that took everything from him. His marriage crumbled under the weight of nightmares and flashbacks. His job at the construction company ended when panic attacks made it impossible to work heights. One by one, the dominoes fell until Marcus found himself living in a blue tarp tent behind Murphy's old automotive shop on the east side of Detroit. For 2 years, Marcus had called that small patch of concrete and weeds home. He kept his area clean, never bothered anyone, and survived on whatever odd jobs he could find and the kindness of strangers. The other homeless folks in the area respected him because Marcus always shared what little he had, and never let anyone go hungry if he could help it. On that particular Tuesday night in November, the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees. Marcus was huddled in his sleeping bag, listening to the wind whip through the gaps in his makeshift shelter, when he heard something that made his blood run cold. It was crying. Not just any crying, but the desperate, terrified sobbing of a child. Marcus unzipped his tent and stepped into the frigid night air. Under the flickering streetlight about 50 yards away, he could see a small figure in what looked like pajamas, wandering aimlessly and crying uncontrollably. Without hesitation, Marcus grabbed his jacket and hurried toward the child. As he got closer, he could see it was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with long brown hair and bare feet. She was wearing pink pajamas with unicorns on them, and she was shivering violently in the cold November air. "Hey there, sweetheart," Marcus said gently, keeping his distance so he wouldn't frighten her further. "What's your name? Are you lost?" The little girl looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. "I can't find my mummy," she whimpered. "I woke up and she wasn't there, and I looked everywhere, and the door was open, and I tried to find her, but I don't know where I am." Marcus's heart broke for this terrified child. His paternal instincts kicked in immediately. "It's okay, honey. My name is Marcus, and I'm going to help you find your mummy. But first, we need to get you warm. You're freezing out here." He took off his jacket and wrapped it around the little girl's shoulders. It was the only warm coat he owned, but he didn't hesitate for even a second. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," she said through chattering teeth. "Emma Rodriguez." "That's a beautiful name, Emma. Can you tell me your mommy's name?" "Her name is Maria Rodriguez, and we live in the Blue House, but I don't know where it is anymore." Marcus knew he had to act fast. The child was hypothermic, and they needed to get her somewhere warm immediately. But he also knew the reality of his situation. He was a homeless man with a criminal record from some bad decisions he'd made during his darkest days after returning from Afghanistan. If he called the police, they might arrest him before they helped Emma. But looking at this shivering child, Marcus didn't care about his own safety. Emma needed help, and that was all that mattered. "Emma, I need to make a phone call to get some people who can help us find your mommy." "Okay, but while we wait, you're going to stay with me where it's warmer." Marcus gently guided Emma back to his tent. He fired up his small camping stove and made her a cup of hot chocolate, with one of the packets he'd been saving for a special occasion. He wrapped her in his sleeping bag and sat beside her, telling her stories about his time in the Marines to keep her mind off being scared. "You were a soldier?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "Yes, ma'am. I was a Marine. We're the ones who protect people, just like I'm protecting you right now." Emma smiled for the first time since he'd found her. "My daddy says Marines are the bravest people in the world. Well, your daddy sounds like a smart man. Is your daddy at home with your mommy? Emma's face fell again. Daddy's in heaven. He was a police officer, and he got hurt helping people. Marcus felt his chest tighten. This little girl had already lost her father, and now she was separated from her mother. He pulled out his old flip phone and dialed 911. What's your emergency? Hi, my name is Marcus Thompson, and I've found a lost child. Her name is Emma Rodriguez. She's about 6 or 7 years old, and she's been wandering around in the cold. She needs medical attention for exposure, and we need to find her mother. Sir, what's your location? Marcus gave them the address of the abandoned auto shop. I'm in the lot behind the building. I'm homeless, living in a tent, but this child needed help. Please send someone quickly. She's been out in the cold for at least an hour. Sir, stay on the line. We're dispatching units now. While they waited, Marcus continued talking to Emma, keeping her warm and calm. He told her about his dog Rex, who used to be his best friend during his tours overseas. He talked about the beautiful places he'd seen and the good friends he'd made in the military. Emma listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed she was feeling safer. 20 minutes later, Marcus heard the sirens approaching. But it wasn't just 1 or 2 police cars. The sound kept growing louder and more complex, like an entire fleet was heading their way. Sounds like help is coming. Emma, pretty soon, we're going to find your mummy. What Marcus saw next took his breath away. One after another, police cars began arriving. Not just patrol cars, but detective vehicles, K9 units, even the mobile command center. Within 10 minutes, there were more than 50 law enforcement vehicles surrounding the area. Marcus felt his stomach drop. This wasn't a normal response to a found child. Something was very wrong. Emma, I need you to stay right here in the tent, okay? The police officers are here to help us, and I'm going to talk to them. Marcus stepped out of his tent with his hands visible, just as he'd been trained to do during his encounters with police over the past few years. But instead of the aggressive approach he'd come to expect, the first officer to reach him was a middle-aged sergeant who looked relieved rather than suspicious. Mr. Thompson, I'm Sergeant Martinez. You're the one who called about finding Emma Rodriguez. Yes, sir. She's in my tent, wrapped up warm. She's been exposed to the cold for quite a while, and she needs medical attention. Sir, I need you to know something. Emma Rodriguez isn't just any missing child. She was kidnapped from her bedroom 6 hours ago. We've had every available unit searching the entire metropolitan area. Her mother is Maria Rodriguez, Detective Maria Rodriguez from our precinct. Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet. Detective Rodriguez. Emma's mother is a police officer, one of our best. Maria's been going out of her mind. The kidnapper took Emma right out of her bed while Maria was asleep in the next room. We found evidence of forced entry and signs of a struggle. We've been treating this as an abduction case. Just then, Marcus heard a woman's voice calling out desperately, Emma, Emma, where are you? A Latina woman in plain clothes came running through the maze of police cars, her face streaked with tears and raw terror. Behind her was an older Hispanic man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. That's Detective Rodriguez and her father, Sergeant Martinez explained. Sir, what you've done tonight, finding Emma and keeping her safe, you may have saved her life. Emma heard her mother's voice and came tumbling out of the tent, still wrapped in Marcus's sleeping bag. Mummy, Mummy, I found a Marine, and he took care of me. Maria Rodriguez fell to her knees and scooped Emma into her arms, sobbing with relief. Oh, baby. Oh, my sweet baby. I thought I'd lost you forever. Emma pointed at Marcus. Mommy, he's a Marine. This and he made me hot chocolate and told me stories and kept me warm. He said Marines protect people. Maria looked up at Marcus through her tears, and he could see the overwhelming gratitude in her eyes. She stood up, still holding Emma, and walked over to him. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. I'm Detective Maria Rodriguez. This is my daughter, Emma, and you've just brought her home to me. Marcus felt uncomfortable with all the attention. Ma'am, any decent person would have done the same thing. I'm just glad she's safe. No, sir, you don't understand. Do you know what you've done? My daughter was kidnapped tonight. Someone broke into our home and took her from her bedroom. We've been searching for 6 hours, and we were starting to fear the worst. You didn't just find a lost child. You rescued a kidnapped child, and quite possibly saved her life. The enormity of the situation began to sink in for Marcus. He looked around at the 50 police cars, the K9 units, the FBI agents who had apparently joined the search, and realized that Emma's disappearance had triggered one of the largest missing child investigations in the city's history. Detective Rodriguez's father, a distinguished older man with silver hair and kind eyes, stepped forward. "Sir, my name is Carlos Rodriguez. Maria is my daughter, and Emma is my granddaughter. After Emma's father, my son-in-law officer, David Rodriguez, was killed in the line of duty last year. Emma and Maria are all the family I have left. What you did tonight, there are no words." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Sir, I'm sorry for your loss. Your son-in-law was a hero, and Emma told me about him. She's a wonderful little girl, and she was so brave tonight." By now, news crews had arrived. Drawn by the massive police presence, the story was already spreading through social media. A homeless Marine veteran had found and protected a kidnapped police detective's daughter, keeping her safe until she could be reunited with her family. But the story was far from over. Detective Rodriguez wiped her eyes and looked at Marcus seriously. "Mr. Thompson, can you tell me exactly what happened tonight? How did you find Emma? And did you see anyone else in the area?" Marcus recounted everything from the moment he heard Emma crying to when he called 911. He described her condition, what she had told him, and every detail he could remember about the surrounding area. The person who took Emma must have abandoned her when they realized the scope of the search. Detective Rodriguez said, "Maybe they got spooked by all the police activity and just dumped her in this area, hoping she wouldn't be found until morning. If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't heard her crying," she couldn't finish the sentence. But everyone understood. November nights in Detroit could be deadly for a child dressed in pajamas. Sergeant Martinez looked at Marcus with new respect. "Sir, you may not realize this, but your quick thinking and the way you handled this situation probably saved Emma's life and gave us our first real break in this case. We're going to need you to come down to the station to give a full statement, but I want you to know that you're being treated as a hero and a witness, not a suspect." Marcus nodded. "Of course, I'll help however I can." Emma, who had been listening to the adult conversation while snuggled in her mother's arms, looked up at Marcus. "Marcus, are you going to be okay? Do you have somewhere warm to sleep?" The innocence of her question, her concern for the homeless man who had saved her, brought fresh tears to everyone's eyes. Detective Rodriguez looked around at Marcus's tent, his meager possessions, and the reality of his living situation. "Mr. Thompson, can I ask you something personal? You're a veteran." "Yes, ma'am. Marines, 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've been struggling since I got back. Made some bad choices, lost everything. Been living here for about 2 years now. Have you applied for VA benefits? Housing assistance?" Marcus looked down at his feet. "Ma'am, I've got a record. Some stupid decisions I made when I was drinking too much, trying to deal with things I wasn't ready to face. Figured I'd burn those bridges." Detective Rodriguez exchanged glances with her father and Sergeant Martinez. "Mr. Thompson, I think we need to have a longer conversation about that." Over the next few hours, as Marcus gave his statement at the police station, an incredible thing began to happen. Word of his heroic actions spread through the department, then through social media, then through the local news stations. The story that captured everyone's attention wasn't just about a child being rescued. It was about a forgotten veteran, a man society had written off, who didn't hesitate to risk his own safety to protect a child in need. It was about how quickly circumstances can change, how thin the line is between desperation and heroism, and how the people we least expect are often the ones who step up when it matters most. By morning, Detective Rodriguez had made some phone calls. Her husband's police union had a fund for officers' families in crisis, but they also had connections throughout the city's Veteran Services Network. "Marcus," she said as he finished his statement, "I've been making some calls. There's a Veterans Administration caseworker named Janet Morrison who specializes in helping homeless vets with criminal records get back on their feet. She says that with your military record and the circumstances of your situation, there are programs available that you might not know about." Marcus shook his head. "Ma'am, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I don't want charity. What I did for Emma, that wasn't about getting something in return." "I know that," Detective Rodriguez said firmly. "That's exactly why you deserve help. Marcus, you saved my daughter's life. You kept her warm, kept her calm, and got her the help she needed, without thinking about yourself for 1 second. Do you think I'm going to let the man who brought Emma home to me sleep in a tent behind an abandoned building?" Emma, who had been coloring at a nearby desk while the adults talked, looked up. "Marcus, Mommy's really good at helping people. She helped me when I was sad about Daddy, and she helped Grandpa when he was sick. She's going to help you too." The simplicity of Emma's faith in her mother and her continued concern for Marcus's well-being broke down the last of Marcus's resistance. "What kind of help are we talking about?" he asked quietly. Detective Rodriguez smiled. "Well, first, you're not sleeping outside tonight. My father has a guest room, and you're going to stay there while we figure out the next steps. Tomorrow, you're meeting with Janet Morrison and a lawyer named Tom Chun, who works with veterans pro bono. They're going to review your case and see what options you have." "But why? I mean, I appreciate it more than you know. But why are you doing all this?" Carlos Rodriguez, Emma's grandfather, spoke up. "Son, my son-in-law Davy died protecting this community. He believed that we're all responsible for taking care of each other. When I see what you did for Emma, when I see how you put her safety above your own comfort and security, I see the same spirit that David had. I see a man who deserves a chance to rebuild his life." Detective Rodriguez nodded. "Marcus, you've been taking care of everyone else in that homeless camp for 2 years. Other people have told us how you share your food, how you look out for the women and older folks, how you've broken up fights and prevented violence. You've been serving your community this whole time, just without a uniform and a paycheck." The meeting with Janet Morrison the next day was a revelation. Marcus learned that his discharge status entitled him to benefits he'd never applied for. His criminal record, while it had created barriers, wasn't the insurmountable obstacle he'd believed it to be, especially with his military service and the circumstances of his offenses. "Marcus, you've got PTSD, which is service-connected," Janet explained. "That entitles you to disability benefits and medical care. The charges on your record are for public intoxication and minor drug possession, both clearly related to self-medication for untreated trauma. With the right documentation and advocacy, we can get you into a housing program within 60 days. Tom Chun, the lawyer, was even more optimistic. With your military record and the character witnesses you now have, including Detective Rodriguez and Sergeant Martinez, I think we can petition to have some of these charges reduced or expunged. More importantly, we can establish a clear narrative of rehabilitation and community service." But the most surprising development came 3 days later, when Detective Rodriguez called Marcus with news that would change everything. "Marcus, you need to sit down for this. We caught Emma's kidnapper." "That's wonderful news. Detective, how did you find him?" "Well, that's the thing. It was because of information you provided. You mentioned hearing a car door slam about 10 minutes before you found Emma, and you thought you saw headlights heading toward the industrial district. We checked traffic cameras in that area and found footage of a vehicle matching the description from our crime scene." "C'est pas. Marcus, the man we arrested is a registered sex offender with a history of child abduction. If Emma had been out there all night, if you hadn't found her when you did..." Marcus felt his knees go weak. He'd known the situation was serious, but the full scope of what could have happened was almost too much to comprehend. "There's more, Marcus. The FBI is recommending you for a civilian commendation for your role in this case, and the mayor wants to meet with you." The meeting with Mayor Johnson was unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. The mayor, a former Army officer himself, listened intently as Marcus told his story from the beginning. "Mr. Thompson, your actions that night represent the very best of what military service instills in people. You saw someone in need, and you acted without hesitation, without thought for your own safety or comfort. That's the kind of citizen leadership this city needs more of." The mayor paused, looking thoughtful. "I've been working on an initiative to connect veterans with city services and job opportunities. Would you be interested in becoming part of that program? Not just as a client, but as someone who helps other veterans navigate the system." Marcus was stunned. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that. Mr. Thompson, you've been living on the streets for 2 years, and in that time, you've been a leader and protector in your community. You've demonstrated integrity, courage, and selflessness under the most difficult circumstances. Those are exactly the qualifications I'm looking for." 6 months later, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his own apartment, adjusting his tie and preparing for another day at his new job as a Veterans Outreach Coordinator for the city of Detroit. The apartment wasn't fancy, but it was his, and it was warm, and it had a bed and a kitchen and everything he'd dreamed of during those cold nights in his tent. The job wasn't just employment, it was a calling. Marcus spent his days connecting homeless and struggling veterans with the services they needed. He knew firsthand what barriers they faced, what fears held them back, and what kind of help actually made a difference. His first success story was Ray, a Vietnam veteran who'd been living under a bridge for 5 years. Marcus found him, gained his trust, and helped him navigate the VA system to get disability benefits and housing. Within 4 months, Ray was in his own apartment and volunteering at a food bank. Then came Sarah, a female veteran who'd been struggling with addiction and trauma from her service in Iraq. Marcus connected her with treatment programs and helped her apply for benefits. She was now 6 months sober and working as a mechanic at a local garage. Every success felt personal to Marcus because he remembered what it was like to feel hopeless, to believe that society had written him off, to think that his mistakes had permanently disqualified him from a decent life. Detective Rodriguez and Emma had become like family to him. Every Sunday, Marcus had dinner at Carlos Rodriguez's house, where Emma would tell him about school and show him her drawings, many of which featured a Marine helping a little girl. "Marcus, I drew this one for you," Emma said one Sunday, handing him a picture of a man in a military uniform with a big smile, standing next to a tent with a little girl. "That's beautiful." "Emma, is that supposed to be me?" "Yes, but it's you as a superhero. Mummy says that's what you are. A superhero who doesn't wear a cape." Marcus looked over at Detective Rodriguez, who was watching the exchange with tears in her eyes. "Emma's right. You know," she said later as they cleaned up after dinner, "you saved my daughter, but you've also saved so many other people through your work with veterans. You've become exactly who you were meant to be." Marcus thought about her words as he drove home that night. 2 years ago, he'd been sleeping in a tent, believing his life was over, convinced that his best days were behind him. One act of simple human decency, one moment of choosing to help instead of looking away, had changed everything. But it wasn't just his life that had changed. Ray now had his own apartment. Sarah was rebuilding her relationship with her children. Dozens of other veterans had found housing, medical care, and hope through the program Marcus had helped develop. The story of the homeless veteran who saved a kidnapped child had become something much larger than a single night's heroism. It had become a movement, a reminder that everyone deserves a second chance, that circumstances don't define character, and that sometimes the people society discards are exactly the ones who have the most to offer. On the anniversary of that November night, Marcus returned to the lot behind the old auto shop. A small memorial garden had been planted there, with a plaque that read, "In recognition of the courage and compassion shown here, and in honor of all veterans who continue to serve their communities." As he stood there remembering that cold night, Marcus heard a familiar voice behind him. "I knew I'd find you here." He turned to see Detective Rodriguez approaching with Emma, who was now 8 years old and had grown taller but still had the same bright eyes and infectious smile. "We come here every year on this date," Detective Rodriguez said. "Emma insists on it. She says this is where her guardian angel lived." Emma ran up to Marcus and hugged him tightly. "Marcus, I brought you something." She handed him a card she'd made at school. On the front was a drawing of a tent, a little girl, and a Marine. Inside, in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for saving me, and for teaching me that heroes don't always look like what we expect. You are my favorite hero." Marcus felt the familiar sting of tears in his eyes. "Emma, you know what? You saved me too. You and your mom. You gave me a chance to remember who I really was." Detective Rodriguez put her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You know what I think. I think that night, you both saved each other. Emma needed someone to keep her safe, and you needed someone to remind you of your own worth." As they stood there together in the place where their lives had intersected in such an extraordinary way, Marcus reflected on how dramatically things had changed. That scared, shivering little girl had grown into a confident, compassionate child who volunteered at the food bank and wrote letters to deployed soldiers. That desperate, homeless veteran had found purpose, stability, and a new family. The 50 police cars that had surrounded his tent that night had come looking for a kidnapper, but they'd found something else entirely. They'd found a hero who didn't know he was one, a man whose character had been refined rather than defined by his struggles, and a reminder that grace can be found in the most unexpected places. Emma looked up at Marcus with the wisdom that only children possess. "Marcus, do you think that night happened for a reason?" Marcus smiled down at the little girl who had changed his life simply by needing his help. "Emma, I think some things are meant to happen exactly the way they do." "I think sometimes people are put in the right place at the right time because that's where they're supposed to be, even if they're living in a tent. Especially then, sweetheart. Especially then." As they walked back to Detective Rodriguez's car, Marcus thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by that one night. Emma was safe and thriving. Detective Rodriguez had her daughter back and had gained a friend who'd become like a brother. Carlos Rodriguez had found peace knowing his granddaughter was protected by someone who understood sacrifice. Dozens of homeless veterans now had housing and hope because of the program that had grown from that night's events. And Marcus himself had discovered that redemption doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it comes as a scared child crying in the cold, needing someone to care enough to step out of their own comfort zone and into purpose. The homeless veteran who had helped a lost child had become a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for the forgotten, and a living reminder that every person has value, every life has potential, and every act of kindness creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. 50 police cars had come to his tent that night, but they'd taken away something far more valuable than a suspect. They'd taken away a story of hope, a testament to human decency, and proof that heroes don't always wear uniforms, or live in houses, or have clean records. Sometimes heroes live in tents behind abandoned buildings, sharing their last packet of hot chocolate with a frightened child, proving that the measure of a person isn't what they've lost, but what they're willing to give when someone else needs it more. That's the story of Marcus Thompson, the homeless veteran who reminded us all that character isn't about where you live, but about how you live. It's about choosing compassion over comfort, service over safety, and hope over despair, even when everything in your own life suggests that hope is foolish. Especially then. 5 years had passed since that life-changing November night, and Marcus Thompson had become something he never imagined possible, a pillar of his community and a beacon of hope for veterans across the nation. The Veterans Outreach Program he'd helped design had expanded beyond Detroit, serving as a model for cities across America. Marcus found himself traveling to conferences, speaking to government officials, and sharing his story with audiences who hung on every word. But success hadn't changed the core of who Marcus was. Every morning, he still started his day by visiting the homeless encampments around the city, bringing coffee, sandwiches, and, most importantly, hope to people who reminded him of his former self. On this particular Thursday morning, Marcus was making his rounds when he encountered someone who would test everything he'd learned about second chances and the power of redemption. Behind a dumpster near the old industrial district, Marcus found a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, huddled in a dirty sleeping bag. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted, and she had the hollow look in her eyes that Marcus recognized all too well. "Ma'am, my name is Marcus Thompson. I work with the city's Veteran Outreach Program. Are you okay?" The woman looked up at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I'm fine. Just leave me alone." Marcus knelt down to her level, keeping his distance, but making sure she could see his face clearly. "I understand wanting to be left alone. I spent 2 years living rough myself, and the last thing I wanted was some do-goodar trying to save me." Something in his tone made the woman look at him more carefully. "You were homeless for 2 years, lived in a tent behind Murphy's old auto shop, lost everything after I came back from Afghanistan, made some bad choices, burned some bridges, figured the world was done with me." The woman's expression softened slightly. "What? Chained?" Marcus smiled, thinking of Emma. "I met someone who needed my help more than I needed to feel sorry for myself. "What's your name?" After a long pause, she said, "Jessica Martinez. Nice to meet you, Jessica. Can I ask how long you've been out here?" 6 months? Maybe 7? Lost track of time. "Are you a veteran?" Jessica shook her head. "No, but my brother was. Marines. He died in Syria 3 years ago." Marcus felt his heart clench. Another Gold Star family member, another casualty of war in a different way. "I'm sorry for your loss. What happened that brought you out here?" Jessica's story unfolded slowly over the next hour. Her brother David had been her best friend, and her only family after their parents died in a car accident when she was 18. When David was killed by an IED, Jessica fell apart. She lost her job as a nurse when she couldn't function through her grief. She turned to alcohol and then drugs to numb the pain. Her apartment, her car, her entire life disappeared piece by piece until she found herself on the streets. "I tried to get help," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "But everywhere I went, they wanted to know about insurance and co-pays and all these things I didn't have anymore. The grief counselors were booked for months. The drug treatment programs had waiting lists. I felt like the system was designed to keep me out." Marcus nodded, understanding every word. "Jessica, I want to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Your brother's sacrifice, your pain, your struggle, none of that has been meaningless. You're still here, which means your story isn't over. And sometimes the people who've been through the worst hell are exactly the ones the world needs most." "How can you say that?" "Look at me. I'm a mess. I'm a failure. 5 years ago, I thought the same thing about myself. I was living in a tent, drinking too much, convinced that I was worthless. Then one night, a scared little girl needed help, and suddenly I remembered who I used to be. That little girl saved my life by giving me a chance to save hers." Marcus spent the rest of the morning with Jessica, not pushing, not making promises he couldn't keep, but simply being present with someone who needed to know she wasn't alone. When he finally convinced Jessica to come with him to the outreach center, Marcus made a call to someone he knew could help, Detective Rodriguez. "It's Marcus. I've got someone here who reminds me a lot of myself 5 years ago. I think Emma might want to meet her." An hour later, Detective Rodriguez arrived with 13-year-old Emma, who had grown into a confident, compassionate teenager with her father's sense of justice and her mother's determination to help others. Emma took one look at Jessica and seemed to understand immediately what Marcus was trying to do. "Hi, Jessica. My name is Emma Rodriguez. Marcus saved my life when I was 8 years old, and my mom and I have been helping him save other people ever since. Want to hear the story?" As Emma told Jessica about that November night, about how Marcus had wrapped her in his jacket and kept her safe, Jessica began to see something she hadn't seen in months. Hope. "Marcus was living in a tent just like you," Emma explained. "He felt worthless and forgotten, just like you do now, but he was wrong about himself, and you're wrong about yourself too." Jessica looked at this poised young woman, then at Marcus, then at Detective Rodriguez, who was watching the interaction with tears in her eyes. "Why do you all care what happens to me?" Jessica asked. "You don't even know me," Emma answered without hesitation. "Because Marcus taught me that we're all connected. When someone helped him, he helps other people who helps other people. It's like a chain of kindness that never ends. You're part of that chain too." Detective Rodriguez stepped forward. "Jessica, I've seen what trauma can do to families. I've also seen what healing looks like when people have the right support. We'd like to offer you that support, if you're willing to accept it." Over the next several weeks, Jessica began the slow process of rebuilding her life. Marcus connected her with a trauma counselor who specialized in grief and loss. Detective Rodriguez helped her navigate the healthcare system to get treatment for her addiction. Emma visited regularly, bringing books and stories, and an unshakable faith that Jessica's life had value. The turning point came 6 weeks later, during a group session for people who'd lost family members to military service. Jessica was reluctant to attend, but Marcus had gently encouraged her to try. "I don't want to talk to a bunch of strangers about David," she'd protested. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," Marcus assured her. "But sometimes hearing other people's stories helps us understand our own." The group met in the basement of a church near downtown. When Jessica walked in, she saw about 15 people of various ages, all carrying the same hollow look of loss that she recognized in her own mirror. The facilitator, a middle-aged woman named Karen, whose son had died in Afghanistan, welcomed Jessica warmly, but didn't pressure her to share. As the session progressed, Jessica listened to story after story of families torn apart by loss, of people who'd struggled with guilt and anger and despair. But she also heard stories of healing, of finding purpose in pain, of honoring fallen loved ones by living fully. When the session was nearly over, Jessica found herself speaking for the first time in weeks about David. "My brother always said he wanted to make a difference in the world," she said quietly. "He used to tell me that every life you touch matters. Every person you help makes the world a little better. I used to think that was just soldier talk, you know? But lately, I've been thinking maybe he was right." Karen smiled encouragingly. "What do you think David would want for you now?" Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "He'd want me to stop giving up. He'd want me to find a way to help people the way he did. He'd probably tell me to stop feeling sorry for myself and start figuring out how to honor his memory." After the session, Karen approached Jessica. "Have you ever thought about becoming a peer counselor? People who've been through trauma themselves often make the best healers for others going through similar experiences." The idea planted a seed that began to grow over the following months. As Jessica worked on her own recovery, she started volunteering at the outreach center where Marcus worked. She helped serve meals, listened to people's stories, and slowly began to see that her experience with loss and addiction, rather than disqualifying her from helping others, actually made her uniquely qualified to do so. A year after Marcus first found Jessica behind that dumpster, she was enrolled in a certification program to become a licensed addiction counselor, with a specialty in grief and trauma. Her first client was a young man whose army buddy had been killed by a roadside bomb in Iraq. "I know this is hard," Jessica told him during their first session. "I know it feels like the pain is never going to end, like you're drowning in it every single day. But I also know that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry differently." The young man looked at her skeptically. "How could you possibly know what this feels like?" Jessica smiled sadly. "Because my brother was a Marine, and he died serving his country too. Because I spent 7 months living on the streets. Because I couldn't figure out how to live in a world without him. Because someone who understood what it meant to lose everything reached out to me and refused to let me disappear." That evening, Jessica called Marcus to tell him about her first day as a counselor. "I kept thinking about what you told me that first morning we met," she said. "About how the people who've been through the worst hell are sometimes exactly the ones the world needs most. I think I finally understand what you meant." Marcus felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he got every time he saw someone discover their own strength and purpose. "Jessica, you've become exactly who you were meant to be. Your brother would be so proud." "Marcus, can I ask you something? Do you think all of this, David dying, me ending up on the streets, you finding me, do you think it all happened for a reason?" Marcus thought about Emma asking him a similar question years earlier. "I think we make meaning out of what happens to us. I think your brother's life mattered. Your pain taught you compassion, and your healing is going to help heal a lot of other people. Whether that's fate or just the way love works in the world, I don't know, but I know it matters." 3 years later, Jessica had become one of the most sought-after grief counselors in the state. She'd helped dozens of families navigate the aftermath of losing a loved one to military service. She'd also become a key part of Marcus's outreach team, specializing in helping homeless women who'd been failed by traditional support systems. On the 8th anniversary of that November night, when Marcus found Emma, the entire extended family gathered at Carlos Rodriguez's house for their annual dinner. The guest list had grown significantly over the years. Emma, now 16 and planning to study social work in college, sat next to Jessica, comparing notes about a research project on trauma-informed care. Detective Rodriguez and her husband, Miguel, whom she'd married 3 years earlier, were discussing a new initiative to train police officers in veteran mental health recognition. Carlos Rodriguez was showing Marcus photos of the community garden they'd planted at the site of his old tent, which had become a gathering place for veterans and their families. But the most touching moment came when Emma stood up to make a toast. 8 years ago tonight, a homeless veteran kept me safe when I was lost and scared. Marcus didn't know that helping me would change his whole life, and I didn't know that being helped by him would teach me what I wanted to do with mine. But that's how it works, isn't it? We help each other, and in helping each other, we figure out who we're supposed to be. She raised her glass of sparkling cider. To Marcus, who taught me that heroes don't always look like what we expect. To my mom, who taught me that protecting people is the highest calling. To Jessica, who taught me that healing happens when we turn our pain into purpose. And to everyone in this room who proves every day that family isn't just about blood, it's about choosing to show up for each other. As glasses clinked around the table, Marcus looked at the faces surrounding him and marveled at how one moment of choosing compassion over comfort had created this entire network of love and support. Later that evening, as he drove home to the small house he'd bought 2 years earlier, Marcus received a call that would add another chapter to his story. Mr. Thompson, this is Colonel Sada Mitchell from the Pentagon. I'm calling because we've been following your work with homeless veterans, and we'd like to discuss a potential partnership between your program and our new military transition initiative. Marcus pulled over to take the call properly. Colonel Michel, I'm honored by your interest, but I'm not sure what a guy like me could offer the Pentagon. Mr. Thompson, you've developed one of the most successful veteran reintegration programs in the country. Your approach of using peer counselors, former homeless veterans helping current ones, has reduced street homelessness among veterans in Detroit by 60%. We want to scale that nationwide. The conversation that followed would lead to Marcus spending the next year traveling across the country, training other cities to implement versions of his program. But more than that, it would lead to a fundamental shift in how the military thought about supporting veterans after their service ended. The traditional approach has been to offer services and wait for veterans to ask for help. Marcus explained to a room full of colonels and Pentagon officials 6 months later. But trauma and pride often prevent people from seeking help until they're in crisis. What we do is meet people where they are. Literally and figuratively. We find them in camps, under bridges, in shelters, and we say, I've been there too, and I'm here to help you find your way back. A general in the back row raised his hand. Mr. Thompson, your success rates are impressive, but what makes you think this approach will work in different cities with different populations? Marcus smiled, thinking of Emma, Jessica, Ray, Sarah, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by simple human connection. Sir, with respect, pain is universal. So is the need to feel valued and understood. Whether someone is homeless in Detroit or Los Angeles or Miami, what they need most is someone who believes they're worth saving. That's not a regional strategy. That's just basic humanity. The program that emerged from those Pentagon meetings would eventually be implemented in over 50 cities across America, helping thousands of veterans transition from homelessness to housing to meaningful work. But for Marcus, the real victory wasn't in the numbers or the national recognition or the awards that began accumulating on his office wall. The real victory was in moments like the one that happened on a cold February morning. Almost exactly 9 years after that first November night, Marcus was doing his usual rounds when he found a young veteran named Alex huddled behind a gas station, shivering in an inadequate coat and clearly in the early stages of frostbite. "Hey there, buddy. My name's Marcus. Looks like you could use some help." Alex looked up with the same mixture of pride and desperation that Marcus remembered feeling all those years ago. "I'm fine, man. Don't need any help." "You know what? I said the exact same thing when I was living behind Murphy's auto shop 9 years ago. Thought asking for help meant admitting I was a failure." Alex studied Marcus's face more carefully. "You were homeless?" 2 years. Marines, 3 tours in Afghanistan, came home with more baggage than I knew how to carry. Lost everything, ended up in a tent, convinced my life was over." Marcus paused. "Want to know what changed everything?" "What?" "A scared 8-year-old girl needed someone to keep her safe. Helping her reminded me who I used to be, and more importantly, who I could become again." As Marcus sat with Alex, sharing his story and offering concrete help rather than empty platitudes, he thought about the ripple effects of that one November night. Emma was now preparing for college, planning to dedicate her life to helping children in crisis. Jessica was supervising a team of grief counselors, and had just opened a specialized program for military families. Detective Rodriguez had been promoted to captain and was overseeing veteran-friendly training for the entire police department. Carlos Rodriguez was leading a support group for grandparents raising children after military parents were killed in service. And now, Alex, this young veteran who reminded Marcus so much of his former self, would hopefully become another link in that chain of healing and hope. "So what do you say?" Marcus asked Alex. "Want to get some coffee and talk about what comes next?" Alex looked at this man who somehow understood exactly what he was going through, who offered help without judgment, who spoke from experience rather than theory. "Yeah," Alex said finally. "I think I'd like that." As they walked toward Marcus's car, Alex asked the question that Marcus had heard dozens of times over the years. "How do I know this is going to work? How do I know I'm not going to end up back here in 6 months?" Marcus smiled, remembering asking Detective Rodriguez a similar question all those years ago. "You don't know, and neither do I. But here's what I do know. You're not alone anymore. You've got people who believe in you, people who've been where you are, people who are committed to helping you figure out what comes next. That's not a guarantee, but it's a pretty good start." The story of the homeless veteran who helped a lost child had become something far bigger than any one night or any one rescue. It had become a movement, a philosophy, a living testament to the power of human connection and the possibility of redemption. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been. A reminder that we are all just one decision away from changing someone's life, including our own. That heroism isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about choosing compassion when it would be easier to look away, and that sometimes the person we help the most is ourselves.